guys, I'm Desmond, and welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Supergirl. In this video, our goal is to provide you with a good understanding of how to play Supergirl in accordance to her strengths, and I'll explain the logic behind her approach in a general matchup. For the sake of convenience, we'll be using the community-approved calculator speak, which was adopted from Mortal Kombat, which I suppose makes it more of an NRS thing. But anyways, let's get started. Starting at the top, Supergirl's forced offense is non-existent. There's no trait you can use for cover, no slow-moving projectile you can run a screen with, and nothing at all. Weak attack string pressure and an overall lack of variation makes her close game limited comparatively to other characters. Your opponent will have pretty much no problem knowing when it's their turn to attack. But her trait does make sure you can score at least 10% on your opponent every 17 seconds. As you can see, her strongest zone by far is the mid-range, thanks to low air dashes and long-reaching quick normals ideal for punishing whiffed attacks. Supergirl on the surface appears to be able to fight at full screen to a moderate degree of competency with her laser cooldowns, but by doing so you limit meter conservation, close-range offensive safety, and damage, which makes shooting lasers highly questionable in the greater outlook of the match. Regardless if you agree or not, having a cooldown on projectiles puts you at a disadvantage and practically forces you to advance to the mid-range due to the inability to continue fighting in the long range. I know this doesn't make sense now, but I'll get into full detail later in the video. Her anti-air capabilities are a bit better than the norm. Supergirl's down 2 has a nice hitbox and is fairly easy to combo off of, but without her full trait, combo damage is low even with meter. Unfortunately, her down back 1 isn't realistic to use as a reliable anti-air. And even if it was, you can't get a full combo afterwards. Speaking of down back 1, her invulnerable wake-up attack seems good since it's uncontestable, but the lack of combo ability in general won't be winning her any awards. Perhaps the worst part about it is that on block, you're gonna eat a full combo. Meter burning won't save you, nor will the inability to buffer normals on block. On a much lighter note, her mobility is above average thanks to air dashes. Because they're decently fast and travel far, your opponent will have a hard time constraining you to any specific zone. Supergirl is excellent at whiff punishing in all 3 neutral zones. Her teleport punch is perhaps the greatest punisher in the game with full screen presence and combo ability. Forward 2 is great in the mid-range and is a cinch to hit confirm into hefty damage. And down 1 into a buffered ice breath or a walking laser are a real pain for opponents to deal with in the close range. However, she is garbage at punishing blocked attacks with reversals. I mean, her fastest usable special is 16 frames. You're better off timing a back 1 or something. And if you're dealing with a -9 situation or so, I hope you're frame perfect with those normals. Alright guys, so first up is the teleport punch. A full screen cross-up that full combos if meter burned and can be performed airborne. There's no reason to use a non-meter burn teleport punch, because every time you use this against your opponent, the better your opponent will get at reacting to it. So make it count when you do use it with the meter burn. The teleport punch obviously tracks to your opponent. However, if your opponent jumps in the air as you come in with a meter burn teleport, there is a chance that it will whiff. This is something you'll want to keep in mind when fighting someone who has an annoying airborne attack like Superman. But if needed, the non-meter burn version will tag them out of the air. It also chases your opponent if they are advancing forward, something that the meter burn version does not do. There's much more to be said about this attack, and trust me, we will go over it in the next section. Next up, we have her Ice Breath, which is better than the frame data tells you because of the option to hold the button down for additional hits, making it impractical to punish on block without a hard read. On hit, it does very little damage to begin with, and if your opponent guesses wrong on your release, you get like 1% damage and a little bit of advantage that's almost completely worthless. If your reactions are decent, you can hit confirm this and meter burn it before the end for a full combo. Meter burning it also makes it safe on block. It's inconclusive on whether or not people can disrespect your meter burn at close range with a crouching guard while mashing a super, so just be aware. In an actual match, I don't think the little ice breath guessing game is worth revolving strategy around. But it is nice to use after a down 1 or a forward 2 if you're not very confident. Just don't overdo it. The primary use for her ice breath is to extend combos. Down back 1 is your special wake up that has startup and vulnerability. After the impact, you're able to meter burn it, which forces a float. So what exactly does that mean? Well, not much outside of corner combos. The awful range and not being able to combo in open space will keep you from using it as an anti-air. As a wake-up special, your opponent can't really contest it, as it's fast, having a 9-frame startup. But if it's blocked, you're gonna eat a full combo for sure. You can't meter burn it on block either. It's kinda like those old movies where the captured hero is slowly being lowered into a pit of alligators. That is exactly how this shit feels like on block. However, unlike those movies, your sidekick, aka the inability to buffer normals after blocking, isn't going to save you. Use with extreme caution. Next up, we have her float. There's not a whole lot to say about it that isn't extremely obvious. Considering you can't attack immediately upon floating, you're not going to be seeing it too much outside of corner combos. But don't be afraid to use some gimmicky tactics from time to time to catch your opponents off guard. Back forward 3 is your generic shoulder charge turned combo extender if meter burned, and it's pretty useless. For starters, the charge itself is really slow enough that people can interrupt you before the impact. The pushback on block makes it safe from practically all specials, even Shoulder Woman. This attack also has a retarded amount of block stun, so retarded in fact, that if your opponent isn't experienced in dealing with this on block, they'll most likely horribly mistime their normals and you'll land a counter hit. The meter burn version changes it entirely to a projectile that levitates your opponent for an extended amount of time, allowing for some teabagging or whatever. I haven't exactly found a reason to meter burn this special. It's also fairly difficult to combo into due to the slow startup, and for some weird reason you can only combo from forward 2 on the left side, not the right. Anyway, as of this build of the game, back forward 3 is gimmicky on block and pointless if meter burned. Seriously, use her Ice Breath to extend combos instead. Supergirl's trait is her eye laser. Each time you shoot a laser, it takes a chunk out of her trait meter, which will replenish itself automatically when not in use. The lasers themselves can be used grounded or in the air and can also be directed straight or diagonally. The mid lasers are safe on block while the high lasers are slightly positive, which doesn't amount to much because you can't buffer anything afterwards. A continuous airborne laser can be done by pressing up and holding 4. By holding the button, you can sustain the laser until your trait meter fully depletes or your opponent gets hit. Pretty worthless. The best aspect of Supergirl's trait is the walking laser, which can be done by meter burning her grounded straight laser when your trait meter is full. It's safe on block, easy to combo, and causes 6 to 10% block damage depending on the range. Yes, this is good, and you should be using it as much as possible. I'll go over the strategy revolving around the walking laser later in the video. First, let's take a look at what moves should be on your mind at specific ranges. Supergirl has a tough time fighting people in the long-range neutral due to the fact that her projectiles have their own cooldown. But that's not too big of a deal because you have the best attack to make your opponents think twice about throwing projectiles at you. The controversial teleport punch. Okay, there are two camps when it comes to this attack. Those who think it's the best move in the game, and those who think it only works against novice opponents. The strange thing is, they're both right. Sort of. I'll explain. Supergirl's teleport punch is essentially a 31-frame full-screen jumping cross-up that leads to a combo if meter burned. This will ruin your life if you're an inexperienced player. But it is full combo punishable if blocked, so yeah, you don't want it blocked. Alright, there's no easy way to say this, so here it goes. Novice players are extremely predictable in general to an experienced opponent. And when an experienced opponent is in the long-range neutral against Supergirl, they're already thinking about your teleport punch. They're not mindlessly throwing projectiles at you, they're waiting for you to give them a free combo, and novice players usually heed the call, thus giving the bad rep from personal experience due to predictability. Seeing as Supergirl's strongest zone is in the mid-range, your goal is to get into the mid-range. And if your opponent isn't spamming you with projectiles due to the fear of the teleport punch, then it's already putting in work. Whether you actually have to use it or not isn't important. I know that sounds weird, so how about this? Let's do a basketball analogy here. Steph Curry is a great shooter, right? Okay, so what if the opponents put 3 guys on Steph the whole game? Does Steph suck now because he can't score any points? Of course not. Since the opponents are devoting a lot of resources to making sure that Steph can't shoot the ball, they're going to have weaker defense everywhere else. So you pass the ball to other teammates for easy points. And that was all made possible because of the potential threat of Steph Curry despite the fact he didn't physically do anything himself. So the strategy of suppressing him completely left vulnerabilities elsewhere. Same logic here. If your opponent is not aggressively throwing projectiles at you in the long-range neutral, that means that they're waiting for your teleport punch. Therefore, they're not controlling space correctly, thus giving you easy access to get into mid-range, which is exactly what you want. Now of course, if your opponent is tossing all kinds of stuff at you, show them why it's not a good idea. And remember, don't be discouraged if you get punished for using the teleport punch. Instead, think about why you got punished. Was your opponent mindlessly throwing projectiles and then unexpectedly blocked your teleport punch and then proceeded to full combo punish you? If that's the case, you got baited by a good opponent. Therefore, you know exactly who you're dealing with, so make the appropriate adjustments. Being unpredictable can be a good thing to shake up good players. Lasers, lasers. As a whole, I believe it's much better to save your trait for the mid and close game, which of course, I'll fully justify my stance later on in the video. However, I think it's okay to shoot a laser here and there to try and sneak in a hit before you make your way to the mid-range. Just don't overdo it. And if you're lucky, you might even goad them to engage you in a projectile fight, which makes easy prey for the teleport punch. Smiley face. Mid-range is where Supergirl is most dangerous because she excels at whiff punishment. However, she does have some good offense too. Her air dash covers a lot of distance and is ideal if you want to force your way in close. Depending on the range, you can cross up your opponent easily due to the fact that she will turn around after the air dash if you go behind your opponent. Regular jumps do not do this. Obviously, if you want to surprise your opponent, you'd want to air dash as low as possible. But by doing so, you are likely to get snuffed by opponents who aggressively control their space. In that case, the sweet spot is high enough to avoid most projectiles and straight pokes, but low enough to still surprise your opponent. The effectiveness will vary based on your opponent's character and how itchy their anti-air trigger finger is. Forward 2 is your longest reaching normal that automatically deals a second hit. This is your best whiff punishing attack due to the speed, range, and hit confirmability. If you have the meter, the best follow-up on hit is to meter burn back 3 and combo accordingly for 47%. You can also opt to cancel into your walking laser for a super easy 25% on hit or 10% on block if you don't want to spend the meter. If your whiff punish game is off or you just want to go in, on block you have several options to keep your opponent guessing, most of which require a hard read to punish. However, Supergirl seems to have an answer for practically every hard read your opponent has. Just because your opponent blocked the initial hit does not mean you can't score some damage through trickery. Oh, and the safest combo is forward 2-3 float down laser. Even Shoulder Woman has an exceedingly difficult time trying to punish it with her 8-frame special. And it still combos on hit. Pretty nifty, eh? Keep in mind that forward 2-3 is not a true block string and it can be interrupted. But it's not like she doesn't have counters for those hard reads too. Even though it's not on the list, I want to talk about back 1-2. Back 1-2 is very similar to forward 2 with a few exceptions. It is 3 frames faster with slightly less range and 3 frames more recovery on block. The second hit is low, which might open up people who aren't familiar with Supergirl's strings. But against experienced opponents, this means very little. Back 1-2 isn't ambiguous on block like forward 2, and the ender is extremely lacking, unlike forward 2's enders. Granted, you can always cancel into a special. However, the timing is more strict than forward 2, thus making it harder to hit confirm for the most optimal follow-up. I know I'm making back 1-2 sound like the worst attack in the game, but it's really not. However, I'd always side with forward 2 in the mid-range neutral because a few frames means very little comparatively to the benefits forward 2 brings to the table. Before moving on, I want to talk about forward 3, because I know that some of you live by this move, which is not bad. However, there is a better option. I'll explain. Forward 3 is roughly the same speed as your normal jump, except it takes you longer to get airborne. Therefore, it's unlikely that you'll jump over anything. The impact comes later than a typical jumping 2. On block, you're at a disadvantage. As opposed to a jumping attack, you can continue the offense. The only real advantage forward 3 has is the ability to cross up from a greater distance. But if you use a low air dash, that only advantage goes out the window. Forward 3 is not a bad attack, there's just a better option. And with a bit of practice, you'll be able to do low air dashes in no time. Considering how chaotic the neutral is in this game, you can't even attempt to control the close range neutral without the beloved down 1. Down 1 is the quickest normal, coming in at 7 frames and actually hitting low. Just like all the other characters, Supergirl can combo from a down 1 into a special if you're fairly confident it'll hit. Meter Burn Ice Breath is the best special to cancel into, seeing as it's a combo on hit and safe on block. The Walking Laser is another good anti option because of the same reasons. But the best use for down 1 is to get your opponent into a defensive state of mind so you can apply your close range meta. On a side note, if your opponent is the overly aggressive type, more specifically if your opponent loves to dash in a lot, zoning with down 1 outside of max range is a useful option select due to 2 reasons. The first being that you can't cancel a dash with a guard or an attack, and the inability to cancel into a special from a whiffed normal. The logic here is that you toss out down 1s out of range while canceling into a special. And if they didn't dash in, you just whiffed a down 1. No big deal, seeing as it's damn near impossible for somebody to react and whiff punish it. But if they did dash in or tried to attack and got snuffed, you'll land the hit and cancel into the special. Supergirl's attack strings aren't anything special in terms of low overhead mix-ups comparatively to other characters. I don't think that back 2 grab and back 1-2 are tricky enough in high-level matches due to the extremely distinctive starters. But back 2 on its own is fairly interesting. Back 2 isn't extremely quick or anything, but it does have extremely short recovery frames. I mean, just look at it. Considering the follow-up is an overhead, you can make a bootleg 50-50 with the help of down 1. Because the recovery of back 2 is so fast, and down 1 is just really quick in general, you get a nice little 50-50. Yeah, I know it's not the greatest, but it's the best that Supergirl has. Just take it easy on using the overhead. It's extremely punishable on block. Even the unbufferable normals will punish you with ease, so be careful. 112 is your best close range string because it's an 8-frame startup that ends with a mid that is special cancel. 112 is also +3 on block, but it doesn't mean too much if you're not frame perfect since you can't buffer anything afterwards. But hey, at least it's not negative, am I right? Right? Okay. Anyway, you can be interrupted before the last hit, but there's only a frame or so of a gap. So aside from a super or some frame 1 armored special, you don't have to worry about it.
I don't like forward 3 against a Wakeup. There, I said it. The current trend of Supergirl players is to end a juggle with forward 2-3 air grab into a forward 3 setup. There's a lot I don't like about this. For starters, you can easily dash out of it for a punish because forward 3 will whiff. Hell, you don't even have to dash, you can just walk out of it. Getting hit before you even leave the ground is a possibility as well. But let's assume that you don't get punished for the attempt and you actually make contact with your opponent. On hit, great, combo time, no complaints here. On block though, you lose your advantage, and now it's your opponent's turn to attack. Life doesn't have to be this way, there's a better alternative. Ending your juggle with 1-1-2 also creates a hard knockdown, which spaces your opponent out for a low air dash to cross up your opponent with a jumping attack. It takes a little practice to get the low air dash consistently, but it's worth it because you don't lose your advantage on block. Dashing backwards won't save your opponent either. There's also a lot of trickery you can do as well. Oh, and if they delay their wake up, no worries. At worst, that just means your jumping attack will whiff, but they still have to deal with your grounded attack. Obviously, certain characters can get away from it, but they are not the majority, and some characters are completely helpless against it. If your opponent has a charging special that can get away from you, try a regular forward jumping too. You'd be surprised what you can snuff with it. Just remember that you won't cross them up, which means you'll be more vulnerable to invincible wake-ups, and dashing backwards will totally avoid your jump. But if your opponent is specifically using an advancing special to get out of the air dash pressure, a normal jumping 2 might be your answer. Day 1 forward 3 setups are just that, Day 1 setups, and are not optimal. Now let's get into Supergirl's trait, those lasers. The lasers themselves are decent as a general projectile. However, the sheer amount of block damage her walking laser does creates a real challenge to justify blowing your entire trait meter on multiple lasers that may not score hits versus at least 10% every 17 seconds using the walking laser. With that being said, I propose the idea of not using your walking laser in combos unless it adds roughly 10% damage. Instead, finish your combo with 1-1-2, then apply the appropriate wake-up pressure into a 50-50 mix-up into a down one into a walking laser or something similar. The rule of thumb is that meterless, non-interactable, and open space combos are worth ending with the walking laser, so pretty much just short combos. Now of course, you should always tailor your strategy to exploit your opponent's weakness. Even if that means blowing all of your trait on full screen lasers and gimmicking your opponent out with the horrible block stun of back forward 3. If it works on your opponent, then go for it. The point of this video is to give beginners a good foundation to base a default Supergirl strategy around. Then when you learn more about your opponent, you should make the adjustments as you see fit to exploit your opponent's weaknesses. Thanks for watching, and I hope you're not completely angry at my disapproval of forward 3 on Wakeup. The next guide will be on Red Hood, and we're planning for that to be out in a few days.